Hey there, midlife mamas. Welcome to the Healthy Lifestyle Habits podcast just for midlife mamas. Because let's be real, this midlife chapter is no joke. Our bodies are different, our minds are different, our hormones are different, and we're trying to figure out who we are after momming for all these years. This empty nest phase is an eye-opener for sure. What worked for us in our younger years is no longer serving us because we have so much life experience, and that's okay. This is a supportive space guiding you through those powerful 1% shifts to help you grow. As we know, health is not a one-size-fits-all, so each week you will learn about different topics, taking away tools and tips to implement. This season, we're going to tackle some of the biggest midlife questions that y'all have had about wellness in this chapter. We're going to be chatting about what is holding us back, where do we find joy, how do we prioritize ourselves through self-care. We're always going to be talking about ingredients, daily toxins, food swaps, breath work, and mindset, just to name a few. There's nothing better than feeling empowered to create the best next chapter. Am I right? After each episode, I hope you feel more equipped and at ease to take a step or two that will allow you to thrive. Whether you're a newbie or an OG listener, I am so glad that you're here. Let's embrace this new chapter and thrive together. Are you ready for all the possibilities? If you said yes, say, I am ready. Hey y'all, I'm super excited to bring you today's episode. We're going to be chatting with Michelle, who's a certified integrative healing practitioner. She's a master neurolinguistic programming practitioner. That's a mouthful. And she's also the author of the Perception Connection Method. Her personal experience going through an emotional transformation, she combines functional lab testing, spirituality, neuroception, and subconscious rescripting to help us to evolve into our highest self. From her personal experience, she really developed some profound practices that she now teaches other people. And I think for sure you guys are going to be able to take away so much from this episode. So let's dive in and see what Michelle has to offer us. Hey y'all, welcome back to the show. I'm super excited today. We're having Michelle on and we were just chit-chatting a little bit and I said, we better push record because this content's so good. So welcome, Michelle. How are you today?
I'm excellent. Thanks. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for taking the time to come on today and have a conversation with me. And let's, educate the females who are listening and the males too, but the females who are listening, who are in this new stage of life and kind of some of the things that you do and that you help women through so that, they can become the best versions of themselves in this new chapter. So if you wouldn't mind, would you kind of just start by telling how you got where you are today? Because I think that's always a fascinating story.
That's a long one.
It always is, right?
Yeah. So, I guess, if I started back in my childhood, the way that I got where I am today is that I never fit in. So I was always trying to be, the good girl. I was trying to do what I was supposed to do. I was trying to in school and at home. And I had a dad who was very exacting. He liked to have all the lights turned off and he liked to have all of the dishes done in the sink. And he always got mad at me for not putting my shoes away. And in school, I always heard that, you're lazy and you're a daydreamer and, you're not living up to your potential and haste makes waste. And, why do you always push everything to the very last minute? And I thought that I was flawed. I really did internalize the idea that I was just a broken person. I had all of these terrible habits and everybody who was criticizing me for the habits that I had, they were trying to make me a better person. Right. And so I thought, well, they're not wrong. I'm wrong. And I need to fundamentally change who I am as this horribly flawed person so that I can be worthy to society. Right. And worthy to myself. And so I grew up with these ideas that, I had to be a perfectionist. I had to do better than everybody else. I had to people please. I couldn't set any boundaries because, oh my goodness, I was so flawed that how dare I additionally on top of that set boundaries with people because they're trying to help me, right? And so I just ended up having the idea that everybody else, sort of the neurotypical people for whom everything was so much easier than it was for me, those people were right and I was wrong. And so I ended up, embodying that idea, and because of that, So what I know now, I should probably sort of flip
Well,
ahead to
let
that.
me
I know
stop
now.
just really quick
Oh,
because
yeah.
I think that the generation in which we grew up, that was the story for a lot of people. I
Mm,
think, people's language was not evolved. And that's kind of a nice way of putting it. But speaking to somebody in those tones, in those regards, with those words, they're hurtful and they're damaging. And I don't think they realized it at the time. But when somebody says something so often, it becomes your story, right? It's not really who you are, but it becomes who you are because of all the external noise that you hear. And why wouldn't it? Because as a child, your brain is not fully developed to think about things from different lenses, right? And so that in itself, I think, is a story for so many people. But I know you're going to flip that story here in a second. And that's what I want people to start listening, because that story, if it's not serving any longer, doesn't need to be part of our story. So go ahead, because I know you're going to hit on that.
Yeah, no, and I call those narratives. What you're talking about is our old stories that, we
Mm-hmm.
tell ourselves, and it's how we operate. We operate from that narrative that we tell ourselves. It's kind of like old scripts. I call them echoes.
Yeah.
And every time that we encounter ourselves, I mean, here I am, I'm a 52-year-old woman. But when I encounter a trigger or an event that is just a regular neutral event, someone could be walking heavily on the stairs. But that calls back an echo for me of something that happened in my childhood, and then I automatically go back to being that 4-year-old. So I'm not
Mm-hmm.
operating from the place of a 52-year-old woman. I'm operating from the place of a 4-year-old or a 6-year-old or a 9-year-old. And so I'm seeing things from the perspective of that old story, what I was
Mm-hmm.
told at that time. And so that is something that we do have to, well, we don't have to, but we can consider going in and flipping that narrative. And we do that through getting in touch with that 4-year-old part of ourselves that still had that belief. And it was a misunderstanding. Oftentimes, we are not able to understand the situation from the other person's perspective.
Yes.
So in that moment, we internalize it as if we did something wrong. I didn't put my dishes away, or I didn't put my shoes away. And so I'm wrong about that because the other person is angry at me. What I'm not understanding in that moment is, well, that other person has their own reason for wanting to do those things. And often what happens is when they were little, they got in trouble for that. And so
Mm-hmm.
if they love me, then they're going to pass that along because they want to make me a better person. And they want to make sure that I don't get in trouble the same way they did. So really what we're doing, excuse me, when we're passing those things along is we're trying to keep that other part safe because we're trying to keep the internal piece of ourselves safe, right? Does that,
Right.
isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And so really, what we're doing when we break that cycle is we're going in and we're finding so that we don't, kind of pass it on to other people inadvertently, because that's the story that we're operating from. That's the narrative that we're operating from. So that we don't pass it on, we can go in and find that 4-year-old and we can talk to them and we can say, hey, you know what? You didn't understand what was happening there. What was happening there wasn't that you were bad. It was that someone else was just giving you their skewed opinion on how things were supposed to be done. And,
Right.
we're allowed to make our own determinations and our own choices about how things are able to be done now. We're adults and we can make the determination of how we want to rewrite those stories so that they don't make us feel bad about ourselves anymore. And so that's a big part of the work that I do, is being able to, go in and find those stories, those beliefs that we have about ourselves, and finding ways to talk to our inner landscape. And we don't just have one inner child. We have so many inner children.
Sure.
And we have people who are standing in the characters that are sort of standing in the way of our inner children to protect them as well. So we have this whole inner landscape, and we have the ability to be able to go in and find those voices that are informing us. We call them maybe our inner critic, our inner bully. And we can go in and we can sit with them and we can talk with them and we can say, hey, you know what? You were keeping me safe. And I appreciate the job that you did by keeping me safe, but I don't need that anymore. And I know what the truth is now. And I'm going to share the truth with you so that you understand. And it's not a one and done thing. We kind of have to
Go
do it
back.
over and over again.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. We
Well,
have
and
to.
I think that would be true with anything, because you're 52, I'm 51. It's been 50 years of those stories playing over and over and over. And so I think one expectation that I like to help people work through is there is no expectation for the amount of time that healing takes.
Yeah.
And it really truly is a bio individual thing, depending on what happened, where you came from, what your stories were, how ingrained they are, how ready you are to change. Like there's so many factors. So there's never like, oh, come work with me for a week and you'll be great. It's like,
Right.
it's an ongoing, it's kind of, I always talk about life and health and wellness. It's like you're the detective and you're searching and you're finding the little clues along the way, but
Mm-hmm.
there's never really like that finish line of, well, if you do X, Y, and Z, you'll be good, because like you're saying, when you were talking about the creak on the stairs, we never know what is in our subconscious that is going to trigger something from before to kind of come up. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think the first thing is awareness. Like when that does trigger, being aware of, whoa, like that is not me any longer, but let me get curious and see what that was all about. And I do think in what you were saying, it's so valid that we need to have those conversations with those other littles and people and things and make sense of it. Because I think once the logical makes sense of, even if it's not a healing making sense of, it's just putting it in its place and having a space for it and understanding that you can have had that experience, but it doesn't have to, if it doesn't serve you any longer, it doesn't have to continue on the journey. You can put it in your suitcase and your backpack and you're behind your seat, where, whatever analogy you want to make of it, but it can come along, but it can't drive anymore. It can't
I use the
dictate.
exact same. Yeah. It can have a seat on the bus, but it's not allowed to drive the bus. That's
Yeah,
exactly.
because, I think, again, that's very empowering. At least for me,
Mm-hmm.
it was when I finally figured that out and figured out like, okay, those were things I couldn't control because I
Right.
was X, Y, and Z years old. And your teacher's telling you this and your parents are telling you this, and all these influences are basically, vomiting stuff into your brain, and you're just trying to like manage it all until I don't know what it is with the ages, and maybe the psychology behind it, but I feel like when you get to 40, you start like waking up, and then 50, you're like, what in the world? Like, this is, for me at least, I was like, I love 50.
Yeah.
Like 50 is my decade. Like it's my decade of
Yeah.
like, here I am, like me, don't really care. I'm
Yeah.
here to do the work for me because I can recognize now from the work I've done that those things can be healed. So
Yeah.
I love it. I
Yeah.
love the work that you're doing.
I'm definitely standing up now and saying that, these things that we tried didn't work. And there's a reason that they didn't work, and it's not our fault. And where
Sure.
I wouldn't have maybe said that in my 30s and 40s, I would have still felt that, that's another layer that was added on top of it, is that the things that we go through to try to heal ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of them are band-aid solutions that are trying to
Yes.
help us function more as, for those of us with ADHD, function more as a neurotypical person. Whereas what I'm saying now is I don't have to function more as a neurotypical person. I can be, the wonderful, creative, big thinking, big dreaming person that I am, and not have to worry about, those sort of more rote things that don't interest me. And I'm allowed to show up and take space as that person now, rather than having to worry about masking anymore to fit in.
To fit in. And I think that's so true. And, fitting in is a big thing for children, teens, 20s, and if somebody could give a voice, I'm a prior educator, and I just feel like there's so much that we could infuse into classrooms to
Ah,
change that narrative
yeah,
that is much more important than algebra.
so much more important.
And
Oh my God.
I
Yeah.
pray, all the time about how school could be so much more enriching and nourishing for children
Yeah.
in as a human being and not just a brain. And
Right.
so one of the things, I think that's super important to mention is that we are often told that, we have to do X, Y, and Z to fit into this. But if you're listening and you felt like you've been in this box your whole life, we're encouraging you to take a step outside the box for just a second and peek and see what it feels like. Because when you
Yeah.
can start owning your uniqueness and your
Mhm.
characters, whether somebody's told you they're flawed or not, they're not. But if you could kind of embrace that, you could start showing up differently. And I think when, my whole show, and you guys know this, it's those 1% shifts. So it's about getting curious to, does this feel right? Let me try it on, see how it feels. If it feels good, take another step. If it doesn't feel good, then just retract back and try something different. And that's also the beauty of life, is that we, as the human, rolling with it, we can kind of make those choices and decisions in this kind of age. But you mentioned ADHD, and I definitely want to tap into that, because like you and I were talking about before we started recording, is, growing up, it was mostly males that were diagnosed. And I do remember being a teacher, and I only had one girl who was, quote unquote diagnosed. But back then, I didn't have the wherewithal. I didn't have the toolbox or the tools to help these children in the way now that I do, that I would have done differently,
Right.
But back then, it was just, you just gave them medication. And I hated it, because they would come and they would sit in their seats and they would just be like zombies.
Mhm.
And I know that's not the case for everybody, but as a teacher standing in a classroom with these kids, it used to really like break my heart, because it's like, how do we help them to cope with and have the tools, right, to be able to have those unique characteristics, but still be able to flow and learn and be in like society, right? And so I'm just curious, from your lens, what have you seen over, I mean, so we're around the same age, so maybe like 30 to 50, what have you seen shift in the ADD, ADHD world?
Well, sadly, I wish that I had seen more shift. But what we're doing a lot of the time is we're coming to our own self-diagnosis. And um, we're recognizing the fact that, hey, you know what? Maybe it's not me. Maybe I can just look, like you said, the 1% shift. Maybe I can just look at the idea that maybe I do have this thing called ADHD. Um, and maybe I can try that on and see how that feels, because we're still not getting these diagnoses. We're still going to the doctor because that's what you do. You feel like maybe I have ADHD, because what has happened to us historically, is that we end up developing anxiety and depression. So we don't know all the time that we have ADHD. We just think that, my nervous system is screwed up every, way from Sunday. And so I am anxious because I'm worried about making a mistake. I'm like a cat on a hot tin roof. I'm terrified about making a misstep because I'm not necessarily paying attention to what everybody else thinks that I should pay attention to. So we get treated for anxiety. And then, we're also depressed because, oh my gosh, I have a hard time keeping relationships, and I have a hard time setting boundaries, and I have a hard time saying no to people. And, it makes people look at us as if we're, less than. And so we get depressed as well. We have the sadness that's happening, because who we are is not being accepted. So what happens when we go to the doctor is we get diagnosed as depressed, and we get depressed medication for depression. And oftentimes, for women especially who have ADHD, and we're getting medicated for these other things that are kind of peripheral to our neurotype, it doesn't necessarily work. And so we're still anxious and we're still depressed. And now our doctor is saying, no, 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 if you're still experiencing these symptoms, then probably what is happening is that we have to up your dose, or we have to try a different medication, or you don't have ADD or ADHD, you have these other things. And, we're not going to get into the whole ADHD diagnosis. And so there's still a real reluctance, even though we know so much more now about how women present with ADHD. There's still a real reluctance to get that diagnosis. So what we're doing is, what I've seen is that more and more people are coming together in social media situations where they're saying, hey, I feel like that's me. And, maybe all of this time, I haven't been lazy, and I haven't been a daydreamer, or it's okay that I talk too much. It's okay that, I'm a bigger personality. Maybe that doesn't mean that I'm actually flawed. And so maybe I can look at the idea that I do have ADHD. I can take, kind of these solutions that are floating around out there that have worked for other people, and I can try to apply them to my life and see if that works out for me. And then, we're finding ADHD coaches. We're finding people like I work with neurotransmitters. I work with vagus nerve, and I work with false beliefs. And what I sort of do is set the stage for women to be able to do the ADHD coaching, and maybe even other types of therapy, because oftentimes, if we've been chronically dysregulated our entire life, and we haven't had the proper treatment for that, then what happens is that our brain is hijacked. And when we try to access our executive functioning, we try to access our planning, even making a plan, let alone sticking to the plan, we're not able to do that. And so what we really need to do is bring our nervous system from a chronic state of fight or flight and shutdown. We're vacillating back and forth between fight or flight and shutdown. We're not getting to that rest and digest state where we're able to take an active role in our own healing. So even if I go in and start talking about, all of these false beliefs, or if you're going to someone who does DBT or CBT, you can't take an active role in that because you are so heightened
Mm-hmm.
that you really need to bring that down with neurotransmitter balancing. With some people are using somatics, that's an option as well. I use neurotransmitters and I use vagus nerve work. That's kind of what I come in with at the baseline. And then after that, then we can take a role in saying, okay, where do I want to go from here? And so that's really how a lot of women that I see these days are coming to their own with ADHD. It's not necessarily through being diagnosed. Some women are going for years trying to get a diagnosis and can't access that for themselves.
So, and I guess one of the questions is it really truly so important to have the diagnosis if
That's a
you're doing
question.
these other things? But I do
Yeah.
want to back up for a second because I had a personal experience with my younger daughter where it was during COVID, and she danced from 3 up. And so she was gone a lot, and she was at dance, and she's laser focused. I mean, she could pick up a dance in 10 seconds. I mean, she could
Yeah.
stand, she could wait, all the things. But she had a really hard time with impulsivity, like just talking out or just doing, and so it was
Yeah.
really like heightened during the time that we were all home together. And so I reached out to the pediatrician, who's half Western, half Eastern, and he's integrative. And so I said, I've been doing a lot of research on ADD or ADHD in girls, and it's very different. And I know it presents differently in girls than boys and all of the things. I don't know if this is what she has going on. I don't know. And so he's like, well, here's like a 200 million page, thing. He said, but before we do anything after he read it, he's just like, we're going to do some neurotransmitter testing. And at that point, I had not heard of it. And so I was like, well, sure, absolutely, And so we did that test, and wow. I mean, the
Yeah.
picture that it painted between, her neurotransmitters and her gut being completely off
Mm.
was really eye-opening. And so once we started to address those two things and get the yeast overgrowth under control and get, the brain a little bit more balanced, and her sleep was better. And in 2 weeks, me, my husband, and my other daughter were like, whoa, who is she? It was like,
Yeah.
and then I thought, this poor child has been living with this, not even knowing,
Yeah.
and couldn't express it, right? Because she had never felt probably any different. And
Yeah.
so, the guilt sets in as the mom, like, how didn't I catch that? Or how didn't I, but
Yeah.
neither here nor there. She's grown forward now, and she knows when she feels out of alignment now. She's got better tools and better awareness of her own self. And so when she feels off, she can kind of peg it already, which for that, I'm very thankful, because had we had not gone through that, she would probably be one of these women in this older age that comes into eventually figuring out, like, this is it,
Yeah.
but, I will say neurotransmitters, the vagus nerve, it's all science, it's all real. And
Yeah.
if you're somebody who's listening and you haven't heard of all of that, we can talk about it shallowly, but, that's for a whole nother episode. But I just think, again, just mentioning it, being aware that it exists.
Yeah.
Neurotransmitters are created, they are things like serotonin, dopamine, epinephrine, GABA. GABA is huge. But it really does play a role between your gut and your brain. And so,
Yeah.
anyways, thank you for bringing that up, because I think it was so fascinating that she didn't have ADD really, or ADHD. She just was out of balance. And her nervous system, back to the nervous system conversation, her nervous system, just from her environment of being on all the time,
Mm-hmm.
was up here, and she did not know how to relax. And so that is something in the next, several, 8 years that she's really been working on, is learning how to just be sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's so much I could say about that. I'm not sure which direction you want me to go.
Any direction you feel led to.
So one thing that I want to say is that when you talk about, is there really ADHD, or is it really just, so yes and no. A lot of people will say, well, there are actual brain differences.
Mhm.
And sometimes that's kind of beside the point, because what happens, we get so out of balance because of whatever it is. So one of the things that we can do is we can look at your genetics. And oftentimes for people who are diagnosed with what we call ADHD, we have an enzyme called COMT, and usually we can see variations on that enzyme. And variations, I mean mutations on that enzyme. And so almost always someone who presents as having ADHD has at least one and maybe two mutations on this enzyme. And what that means is that we break down dopamine very slowly. So we get addicted to being in a high dopamine state. And when we take medication, what happens is that kind of artificially keeps us elevated in that high dopamine state. It's one of the reasons that we kind of shake when we're on medication. But it's kind of what I call chemical masking, because it helps us be able to focus and you know what I mean by masking, where we're sort of wearing that, mask of not who we really are, but just being able to make it through the day. And I'm not coming down on medication, because if it helps people be able to get through their day, then, I'm all for that. But it's not making the changes that you're talking about with your daughter, where you're actually changing our neurotransmitter balancing, so that when we recognize that we're getting into those states, well, we can tweak our supplements a little bit, and then we can, and that's probably what your daughter does when she recognizes, right? And so we can't do that with medication. We're either on it or we're off it. And so when we're doing neurotransmitter balancing, then we can recognize, okay, I need a little bit more dopamine support today, or maybe today I need a little bit more serotonin support. And we can, make those changes as we go through. If there's a stressful event, we can make those shifts and adjustments. And then we can look at it, from the perspective of, does it really matter if we have the ADHD diagnosis? And the reason that it matters is because it's the only way we can get medication. So if we want to get that medication so that we're able to focus and we're able to perform like a neurotypical person, who doesn't have these genetic variations that we have, then yes, that medication is really important. But what that means is that I'm still embodying the false beliefs of the idea that neurotypical is here and neurodivergent is here, right?
Exactly.
So I'm still embodying the idea that it's better to be here.
That's right.
So, yeah. So, I mean, really, those are the shifts that we need to make.
Yes.
And if we want to actually heal our body, as opposed to just getting through. And then we do things like, we go out and we get a new haircut, or we go out and we buy new clothes, or we go on vacation. And we think all of these things are going to make us feel better. And the problem is that we just bring everything along with us.
Exactly. You just pack it up in your suitcase and it goes right along. Yep.
That's right. So we're not really changing anything.
Yeah. And I appreciate that whole education right there, because again, I'm not against medication, but medication doesn't help to actually rebalance your body. It doesn't give you the tools. And I think if someone is, if you want to use the word neurotypical, it's okay. It's okay to be you. It's just having tools in your toolbox so you can manage life in a way that feels good for you. Not because somebody else tells you you should be able to do X, Y, and Z, because this is not a cookie cutter world and no two people are the same. So if everybody was to be able to do X, Y, and Z, it would be a very boring world. And we need creative minds. We need forward thinkers. We need people who have high energy, and it's just about finding what works for you. And I think that's where the Western thought philosophy doesn't really come through. Because again, if you have the feelings, if you are exhibiting those behaviors, if you do have that enzyme, those are all great things to know. It's good to be aware of all of that, but then what do you do with it? And I think having those tools, how to regulate your nervous system, when you were saying, does my daughter tweak stuff? She does, but she also has been taught, what can I do in this moment? If I'm feeling this, do I get outside and get a little bit of a walk? Do I get some sunlight? Do I shut off do I shut off the screen time? Like, what is it? What's happening at this moment where I'm feeling this? And shifting that a little bit. And I think, again, the awareness of what's going on and where you are, and then digging in your toolbox to find some things. And I'm not against medication, because sometimes you need that in order to even see clearly, to look in your toolbox, to get some tools in your toolbox, And so if you're somebody that needs to be on medication to get started, I'm all for it, but you've got to be simultaneously working on the lifestyle part of it and how you're going to shift as a human, and not just dependent on the medication to help you skate through the day.
Right.
So
I agree with that.
yeah. So again, I think that it's all a work in progress. And I hope to see, even more expansion in this area over the next decade, just because I do feel like there's a lot of good science out there. And there's a lot of people that are doing alternative work and presenting that alternative work to the world. And I think that can only really increase the tools in people's toolboxes.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right about that. I think there are more and more people all the time who are recognizing the fact that, we can step out of this matrix. We don't have to go by what's always been done. Just because it's always been done doesn't mean it's the best. And we can look at ourselves as different, and different is good. So,
exactly.
we can completely change our focus on how we have to do things. And that's one of the things too that I really promote with my clients in particular, is that just because your parents did something a certain way and they've convinced you that that's how it has to be done, maybe we can look at it a different way. One of the things that's really hard for women in particular, that's what I know, with ADHD, is getting through some rote things that we have to do, like, doing our dishes after every meal, and, making meals every night and all of the things. So when we have ADHD, we aren't focused on rewards and consequences. So we're not motivated by the same things that other people are motivated by. What we are motivated by are things that are novel, things that we find interesting, things that are challenging, like a puzzle, and things that are urgent. So those are the things that motivate us, which is a complete shift. It's a paradigm shift from how, so if we're going to therapy that's focusing on, rewards and consequences, then that's not going to resonate at all with us, because those aren't the things that motivate us. We have to look at doing things a different way. So what I encourage people to do is, you can, if you don't like planning your meals, well, do it all in one day. Go out, make it an excursion, make it a quest, and go out and look for recipes that really are exciting to you, that maybe you've never tried before. Go out and buy all of the ingredients. This is what I do. It might not work for everybody, but go out and buy the ingredients and just have a day of cooking. Where today I have the ability to do this. It helps to have a support person on standby, just in case we actually lose the motivation halfway through the task.
Right.
But sometimes if we're able to do it all when we have that burst of motivation, we can do something like crock pot freezer meals, where we can just fill these bags and throw it in the freezer. And then each day, all we have to do is pull a bag out, put it in the crock pot, and there the meal is done for the day. We don't have to think about it for 2 more weeks. It's just done. And we can do that with a lot of things. Like, for example, my family had a tendency to believe that dishes had to be washed after every meal, or put in the dishwasher after every meal. Well, do they? Is it something that we can reimagine in our lifetime? Is it going to absolutely rock our whole world if we just rinse the dishes off after we've finished eating, and then we'll put them all in the dishwasher all at one time? So we do it once a day instead of 3 times a day. So, we can look at these shifts, and it's a real paradigm shift, because we're looking at this generational information and this cultural and societal information that's been passed to us. And we're looking at it in a different framework. And we're saying, wait a minute, just because it's always been done that way doesn't mean that I have to do it that way. There's not going to be any massive cataclysmic event that's going to happen if I don't do my breakfast dishes, right? It's just going to affect how negatively I feel about myself. It's going to affect potentially my motivation for doing other things that I would rather get done. And so we can look at these things differently and say, there are different ways. I can maybe ask someone else to do it for me. I don't necessarily have to do all of that myself. And that's a big thing that moms take on, is that we have to do all of this stuff ourselves, right?
Right.
And that's not true. The truth of the matter is we can ask for help.
And I think, like, I'm thinking like a mom in a busy world, right?
Yeah.
When we get a pattern down that works for us, we instill that pattern on everybody else.
That's right.
And something I learned along the way, because my youngest daughter really challenged me to the core, which was meant for purpose. But, instead of telling, it's asking, how would you see it? What is it like like my older daughter is extremely creative. She is a hot mess. She's very disorganized. She can get everything done, and she manages, but she was the one that always had like all the stuff at the bottom of her backpack. And even now in college, it's just, she runs a totally different way. And it's a big joke because I get there and I'm like, okay, what do you want me to clean? It's like, give me, because that's myself. Like I've got, and so we've come to this happy medium that, she is who she is, and that's okay. It doesn't mean I have to live that way. She can live that way. And, we can live in harmony in our own ways. And I think as parents, especially like when I grew up, it was like we were conditioned to be a carbon copy of whatever our parents did. And I've tried really hard over the last decade to shift that a little bit because I became aware of what was happening. And so, it's like, well, what do you think? How would you do the dishes? How would you, I mean, not just using that as a scenario because you did, but it's like, would you put them all day long? Would you, and it's like, where's your cutoff? You've got to have some boundaries around it because otherwise you could be living in filth and bugs and all of that. But what feels right to you? Like for me, it's use and put it in the dishwasher, but for you, it could be leaving it all day, making sure that you've at least rinsed them, and then just doing it all at once. And I think giving kids the choices, right, to see the world from their lens also, and for us to see it through their eyes is pretty cool. I mean, again, for me, it's been my learning curve, right? It's been my adjustment. It's been my growth to do things differently. And, I think without having my second daughter, I probably wouldn't be where I am today because my other daughter just followed suit. It was like she was the easy one and she didn't challenge anything. And that's not great too, so it's like we're pushing her to challenge herself. It's like very interesting when you have children because everybody's personalities are so different. But I do believe that children bring up your giant shadows and really make you dig, which I think is an amazing gift, actually. As hard as it is when you're in it, I think when you can get outside of it and zoom back a little bit. You said, I loved what you said about the reward system, like that not working for somebody that has maybe this genetic makeup. And I think, that's really important to note because again, as parents, we were and have been conditioned that even in school, it's like you do this task, you get this star. You do this task, you get your allowance. Whatever it is, it's what would you call that? Like systems that were created to keep things kind of organized, but not everybody fits into those systems. And I appreciate you, bringing that up. And it was interesting because I do think when my younger daughter is interested in something, for sure, totally takes on a different, thing. Things that are urgent that, bring that like spike of
That's why we procrastinate.
Yeah, and then you just like get that
creating a false sense of urgency. Yes.
Yeah. And it's almost like a protection to get you where you need to be in order to do the things you need to do. So maybe that's kind of a tool, I guess, that
definitely
one that they've created, just within. I was never a procrastinator, but I will say in my older years, I don't know if it's procrastination, but just I don't find things to be so urgent anymore. I have kind of like relinquished. I don't know. 50 is really like I'm only 1 year into it, but it really like just like throw me for a loop. But I love it. It's great. I'm not going to complain. One of the things you and I talked about a little bit before is you have a 5-step kind of thing that you work through. Before we hit on that, one of the things I wanted to maybe have you talk about is for people who are listening, we were talking about nervous system regulation, and there's lots of tools that can be done to help regulate the nervous system. So I was just curious, what is one of your favorites?
Yeah, so I have a couple of them. What I use is something called the Safe and Sound program, and that is for people who are absolutely in survival mode. A lot of my clients come to me in what I call survival mode, and survival mode is different from being stressed out because we're basically gasping for air, if you can visualize it that way. We're bouncing back and forth so much between fight and flight and shutdown that we rarely ever get into a sense of rest and digest, where we can just kind of relax and we can be, calm and social. And so when I'm dealing with people who are in that kind of a scenario, like we talked about before, their brain is hijacked, and we're not really able to to have a hand in using some of the techniques that I'm going to talk about in a second. So what we do is a listening program, and you show up and I'm there like we would be here right now. I co-regulate with you, which means that, I provide a framework, a container of calm and peace. And you listen to music that is filtered, increasingly filtered, and it sends cues of safety to your vagus nerve, because we are primed. Those of us who are constantly in fight or flight and shutdown mode, our ear is primed to hear cues of danger, which would be like a scream or a growl. So we need to train our ear to receive the sounds of safety, which would be like my voice or a mother's lullaby, just a very calm mid-tone range. So that's what I use with my clients, because it's the least amount of effort. You show up, you do have to show up. You do have to actually put the earphones on and listen to the music. But aside from that, it's very calming. There's a lot of, again, co-regulation that happens. And so that's what I use. And having said that, if you're not quite at the point where you're sort of in survival mode and you're able to think about, okay, I'm starting to get dysregulated now. What can I do? Well, there's a couple of things that we can do. One of them is a lateral eye movement. I do talk about that on my website. I can talk about it here if you want me to. But it's an eye movement that activates our vagus nerve, and it can send a sense of, so our vagus nerve is something that it happens sort of in around the ear, but it innervates all of the major systems of our body. So when it gets activated, when our vagus nerve is sort of primed, we can feel like that fast heart rate. Our stomach gets a little bit upset. We feel those symptoms that we feel in fight or flight. So if we feel that starting to come on, we can do this lateral eye movement technique. We can do, one of the big things is your breathing. So just make sure that your exhale is longer than your inhale. And what that does, it sends a cue to our body. If we're running away from a lion, we don't have time to exhale. We are breathing in more than we're breathing out because we're trying to get all of that oxygen so that we can mobilize, right? Mm-hmm. If we have time to exhale, that sends a physiological cue to our body that says there is no lion chasing us. We have time to breathe. We can settle our cortisol down. We can settle our body down. We can settle down our heart rate. We're not in immediate, imminent danger. So that's one thing that you can do. Make sure that your exhale is longer than your inhale. Another thing that you can do, I often talk to people who get really dysregulated and aren't able to focus very well in situations like this, where I'm talking to you, or a job interview. Mm-hmm. And we could be very well prepared and we could know our stuff, really well qualified, but especially if we have issues with our nervous system, and it feels like we're going up against a lion in those moments. And so people ask me, what can I do? And the colloquial wisdom is, well, practice and, make sure that you don't repeat yourself. And see, what we're doing there is we're putting ourselves on high alert. Oh my gosh, I have to remember this. I have to remember this. I have to remember this. Don't do that. Right. If you're in a situation where you're going to be going in and having kind of a confrontational talk with, say, your child's principal or someone where you're starting to get anxious about having this conversation, don't think about what you're going to say. Don't do that to yourself, because then you're just putting yourself in a heightened state. What you want to do instead is get out a piece of paper and a Sharpie and doodle. And this is called neurographics, or some people call it neurographica. You're making swirly lines. Don't do any angular lines. Make sure that the lines cross over one another. I can I demonstrate this sometimes on my channels. But doodle. Big swirly lines. If you have markers or colored pencils or something like that, color it in. And just, you're getting your brain in a state of safety. And so that's what we want to do in those moments. We don't want to activate our nervous system. We don't want to get additionally overwhelmed by all of the thoughts of what we should be doing. We don't want to be shoulding on ourselves in those moments, shoulding on ourselves in those moments. And the other thing that we can do is watch something funny. Before you go, instead of sitting there saying, okay, I have to remember this, and I have to remember that, and oh gosh, I have to remember, definitely don't do that. Just watch a funny show, because laughter is able to regulate our nervous system as well. So we want to do things that put us in those moments right before we have this kind of hard conversation or a challenging event that we have to go to. We want to do things that settle us down rather than amp us up. So those are all of the techniques that
when you were talking about the lateral eye movement, is that like EMDR?
So I do EMDR. It's not. We don't do the. Yeah, no, it's not quite like that. This is really just an eye movement. So you keep your head straight.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, we're looking straight ahead and we're moving only our eyes. So what we would do is move just our eyes all the way to the right as far as we can go, and just hold it like that for anywhere from 30 seconds to maybe over a little over a minute. And what you're looking for is you're looking for a release in your body. So what that might feel like is a deep sigh or a big breath or a yawn. We might feel a yawn, just a sense of release. And once you feel it going to this direction, then again, hold your head straight and go to the opposite direction. And you're just getting the tension in your eyes until you feel that. And then when you get the release, then that can
That's
really
weird.
calm us down. It seems so simple, but something that simple can actually really provide a lot of relief in our nervous system.
That was cool. I've never done that before, but that actually was really cool to experience. I
Yeah,
think breath is very underutilized. I think your
very.
breath is something, again, that we should be being taught from 0 years old all the way up, and it's something that is super easy, it's free,
Yeah.
but it actually works. And
Hmm.
I think, if you've tried it before and you haven't really found success in it, I would say try it again, because I
Hmm.
do think how you breathe, and there's different techniques out there, but just inhaling and having a longer exhale, which again is very simple and it seems way too simple to like help
Yeah.
calm yourself, but it actually really, really does. And I
Hmm.
think when you can start taking a moment just to close your eyes, pause for a second, do that deep breath in, and then inhale longer, maybe 5 times, or so, obviously give and take, but just to you again, feel that sense of relax. For me, it now comes faster because I've been doing it for years, but I
Oh, good.
just think, when I first started, I was like, this isn't going to work, and
Yeah.
then when it finally started to work, I was like, wow, this is ridiculously easy and doesn't cost me anything,
Right.
and it's something you can do on the spot. You don't have to have something with you. It's always with you, so
Right. Mhm.
I do love those suggestions though. Um, and I think that again, they're, I was going to talk about the doodling thing because, the adult coloring books.
Mhm.
So my mom currently lives with us and she has dementia. So we have a lot of coloring books and we have a lot of stuff. And so
Right.
when I spend time with her, I do a lot of coloring, and I've just realized how calming coloring really is. Like, I could have a day and I come in and I sit down with her and I start coloring and I'm like, oh, this is just like relief. It's like
Yeah.
very interesting. So I can
Yeah.
definitely see how that works. And of course, laughter is the best medicine, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it is.
It's
Yeah.
very
And
overlooked.
we get very caught up in the idea of no, 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 I have to do this and I have to prepare and I have to make sure I know this. And so we get so caught up in our brains that we overlook the things that are really simple that will make the most difference.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, for sure. I love it. All right. Do you want to talk about your 5 strategy?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay.
I'd love to talk about that. So my two main tenets are when we're healing,
Hmm.
the two main overarching ideas is radical self-love and personal accountability.
Love, love,
So
love that. Can you say that again, please?
radical self-love and personal accountability. So what that means is that the choices that I make are the choices that there are no other choices that I could have made because all of the choices that I make are based on all of my experiences up until that moment. And I am making in any given moment the best choice that I feel I can make, both for myself and the people in my life who I love and the circumstances. And so when we look at it from that framework, we can develop a radical self-love because I recognize the fact that I'm doing the very best that I can and that I am a good person. And that if I've made a choice that turns out to be a bad choice, well, that could have potentially beneficial ramifications on the future. We don't know. So we don't know if we're making this quote unquote bad choice. It could turn out to be the very best thing. So we need to really love ourselves and love our choices and love our abilities and just not have, when we have those ideas about ourselves, we can switch those around. And that is where the personal accountability comes in because we never have to make a change. So if we see, a coping strategy that's not serving us, maybe it's the way that we're eating a lot of fast food or we're addicted to sugar or something like that. We don't have to change that. We can allow ourselves to keep that because that mechanism is serving us in some way. And we can allow ourselves to keep that for as long as we need to. Nobody can come into our life and say, you have to change that. You have to make that change. That's totally up to us. And so by taking the personal accountability, we're not saying that you have to make any changes. I'm not saying that, okay, you have to change this, you have to change this, and you have to change this. What I'm giving you is an off ramp. I'm saying, if you want a different outcome, here is a path that you can take to get to that different off ramp. You don't have to take that path. You're perfectly valid and loved and worthy if you continue on the exact same path that you're on right now. Full stop. However, if you're tired of the outcomes that are coming out from the way that you're going, here's a potential idea that you could look at to take some personal accountability and make a shift, right? I'm not judging whether you choose that or not,
Right.
but I'm offering that to you.
Yeah. And I think that's well said, because we forget the accountability to ourselves. I think a lot of times, especially when you're in that momming stage, you're just serving others constantly, and you forget to have that self-compassion for yourself and that self-love and all of those things. But you also forget that you are accountable and you have that personal accountability to yourself. And so that's been kind of, I feel like in a lot of cases, forgotten for so many women. And that is why my heart and soul is for this midlife mama, because it's like our time now. It's our time to start asking these questions, start digging, start unlayering, start peeling back. And, if you want something different, you have to do something different, right? If you're happy where you are and content and everything's well, and you feel like this is where you are and you're fulfilled, then keep doing what you're doing. But the minute that feels out of alignment for you, you have the choice, like Michelle's saying, you have the choice to try on some different things. And maybe along Michelle's path, there's like one or two things that you find that you take away. And then you go over here to somebody else's path and you take one or two things, because ultimately you're creating your own journey, if you will. And I always think of like the winding road. And so Michelle's going down this way, and then Jennifer's off to the right, and then Paul is this, it's like, and so maybe you're just like stepping off the path for a minute and you're grabbing two things, and then you're stepping off the path the other direction. And I just think, again, it's being personally accountable for the choices that you make and how they're serving you or not serving you. So we do have that control, and that's a beautiful thing. We have that empowerment to make these amazing choices for ourselves, or decide that, I love where I'm at and I'm doing great, and I don't need to pivot at this moment for any particular reason. So I'm just going to keep living that path.
Right. So, but on that same topic, the way that we get stuck in suffering is saying, I don't like the choices that I'm making. But it's everybody else's fault. That's external circumstances. So we talk about, in my course, I talk about locus of control a lot. And what that means is, who is responsible for the fact that I'm suffering right now, right? Who is responsible for that? If it's this, I can't do it because of this, and I can't do it because of my job, and I can't do it because of all these external circumstances, you're going to continue on a path of suffering. So that means that you're going, and you're still worthy, and you're still valid, and you can still keep going there as long as you want to keep going there. But you have to recognize that if you're not at peace on that path, then the responsibility, the agency lays with you to look for one of those off ramps and see where you can make those changes. So talking about the 5-step path that I use, the first 2 steps and really what I do is I take people by the hand who are in survival mode and don't know where they're going to go. Because, you've been to doctors, you've been to naturopaths, and everybody has kind of a piecemeal approach of, let's try this for a month, and let's try this medication. And we're going to talk about, changing this one behavior in your life. And when you're in survival mode, changing these one-off things can sometimes, have the 1%. But sometimes you do need a little bit more, and you need someone to come in and take you by the hand and say, I'm going to show you exactly where to put your feet. Because if you don't know where to go, then there's a million things out there that you could potentially be doing, and you don't know which one to do. And that gets overwhelming in itself, right?
Yes.
So for a lot of women who I'm grateful that they trust me to do this, but I've gotten myself out of that position, and they look at me and they say, how did you do it? And I say, I'm going to show you exactly where to put your feet until you are capable of finding your own path, right?
Yes, ma'am. Yep.
So that is where the 5 steps come in. And so the first 2 is getting yourself regulated. And we do that through neurotransmitter work, which is functional lab tests, and then a protocol of supplementation. So it is geared specifically to the individual. I don't do any spaghetti treatments. I don't just throw stuff at the wall and say, okay, well, this is your symptom, so if you have X symptom, you get Y treatment. That's not really what we do. I look at, what do your tests say? And your test results could say something completely different than what your symptoms are indicating. That happened with me when I was trying to heal. It looked like I had low cortisol. They treated me for low cortisol. It turned out that I had very, very high metabolized cortisol. So I was just making the situation worse. So when we look at functional lab tests, we can tailor the protocol specifically to that individual. And so what, like you were talking about with your daughter, where she's able to regulate her dopamine and her serotonin in a natural way, that's what we would do for people. And that's not a Band-Aid solution. That is actually helping us to actually regulate our neurotransmitters. And then that helps us. So what do neurotransmitters do? Those are little chemical messengers. They make us feel calm and happy or manic or sad. They tell our body how we're going to essentially be feeling these emotions. So if we can bring those back into balance, then we spend more time in the rest and digest, the calm, the peaceful, the motivated but not manic state. So we can balance that out. And that's a really important part of when you're in survival mode. We really should be looking at doing that.
I want to pause just for 1 second because I just want to go back because I think it's super important to mention, but a lot of times, well, not a lot of times, all the time, if you are not testing and you are just guessing, there is situations in which you actually can make things worse. And that's what Michelle was talking about. She was being treated for something where she was actually not that at all. And so without having that test done, she wouldn't have known that. But I'm assuming somewhere along the way, you got a test done that showed all of. So I just think, testing for neurotransmitters is really important, especially if you're going to get on a medication, an SSRI or something. I think if I could give anybody any, tips, it would be get tested. And you have to do that through a functional person. Because again, I think you could be taking the wrong stuff and it really sometimes can just make the situation worse. And that's not really where you want to go when you're not feeling good. You want to make sure that you're taking the right steps to put you back on, the better path of being able to keep yourself regulated and all the things. So, all right, sorry, go ahead. Right. So that was one.
No, and we can do that I'm an integrative healing practitioner. And so a big part of what I do is actually running these tests. And we can do that not just for neurotransmitters, but we can do it for, thyroid. We do it for all of the systems of the body. We do for gut work as well. Before you do a detox, a lot of people are jumping right into doing these detoxes. And it's critical to do some detoxing because 95% of our neurotransmitter function begins in our gut.
Yes.
But if we're starting with that before we balance our body, before we get out of survival mode, then we're making the situation worse because all of a sudden we're releasing all of these toxins. And what's going to happen? Where do they go? So especially if our detox pathways are blocked, and this is kind of beyond the point, but that's something that we go into later on after we get regulated and balanced. We can start looking at these other symptoms of our body because oftentimes when you're in survival mode, you're not just dealing with mental health issues like anxiety and depression and overwhelm. You're dealing with physical symptoms as well because our body bank dips so low that we start expressing things like autoimmune and chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia and all of these kinds of things that we can make those things a whole lot better if we're doing it in a comprehensive linear path where we're building and balancing and then clearing and then making changes for those things.
Yeah. And I want to say really quick, the detox thing, just because again, it is a buzz thing right now and it's been for a while, and I am all for detoxing in a proper way, but there are many times where people are just selling detox protocols that make people worse. So again, if you're thinking about, oh, maybe I should detox, you need to understand what that actually means. You need to work with somebody. You need to do it in a way that's going to allow your body to expel and bind and actually get rid of. Otherwise, it does recirculate and goes back into your body, which can make you worse off than you were to begin with. So again, there's a place and time for all of it. It's just not going with the gimmicky stuff and going with somebody who actually truly has been trained and knows how to go through the steps for your safety. So
right.
That's my soapbox.
And I agree with you. And I don't blame people for wanting to go after the gimmicky because it's faster, it's cheaper.
Sure.
And we're going for quick fix. We're a quick fix society, right? Yes. And so we want to go for that. What is going to give us the biggest bang for our buck? And we're buying into that idea that, okay, let's just go right for if the issues are happening in the gut, let's go right for the gut. Well, that's not the best solution, like you just said. It almost always, first of all, it very rarely works because our bodies are very smart. And so if you've been through a detox, you're like, oh, I detoxed and that didn't work. Well, there's a good reason that it didn't work. And that's because our body holds on to these toxins for a reason. Our body knows that if we start expelling these chemicals, these toxins, before we're ready to expel them through the proper detox pathways, because our pathways are all messed up. Most of our pathways are blocked. So if we're trying to expel them before we're ready, then our body just says, no, I'm not doing that. You don't know what you're doing. I know what I'm doing. Like my body knows what I'm doing more than my brain knows what I'm doing. And so it's not going to work. And what it will do is it will sort of, because these are heavy things that we're putting into our body to try to detox. And so oftentimes it will affect other areas of our body that we did not mean to affect. And so, like you said, yeah, if you're going to do it, you should probably do it with someone who knows what they're doing. Almost always. And if you're going for the quick fix, just recognize the fact that, you may be in a bigger hole in the end than what you bargained for. So there's the second part. I keep getting off track. I have ADHD and I do that. But the first part is balancing neurotransmitters. The second part is vagus nerve. We want to get to a state of being safe first. So I employ neurotransmitter testing and protocol. And the second thing is the Safe and Sound program that I use. So that gets us balanced. And once we can get at least a little bit balanced and back into that rest and digest state, then we can start bringing in the work that we do with false beliefs. And I use a system it's kind of like an inner child work. It's my own sort of brand of inner child work, where we use kind of an internal family systems model. And then we employ some dialectical behavioral therapy. So we use some spiritual practices as well when we get into doing that. So those three things form the main components. So the neurotransmitter work, the vagus nerve work, and the false belief. And if we're shifting one of those, then we might, be able to start, I call it a snowball effect. We might be able to start moving that snowball in the opposite direction because it gets rolling, right? Our neurotransmitters affect our vagus nerve. Our vagus nerve affects, when we're in a state of fight or flight, we start telling ourselves or believing a whole lot of the false belief that we had about ourselves because we can't do the things that we think that we're supposed to do when we're in a state of constant fight or flight, when we're in a dysregulated state. And so that solidifies the beliefs that we have about ourselves. I can't do it. I'm broken. I can't hold a boundary. I have imposter syndrome. I'm not worthy. So all of these things affect one another. So what we want to do is get them all rolling in the right direction together so that they can support one another. And so as we balance our neurotransmitters, that helps our nervous system. And as our nervous system gets balanced, well, that helps us be able to see that our false beliefs about ourselves aren't actually really true. So those are three of the main steps on the path. Those are the three ones that we start with. And then surrounding that, kind of enveloping it and supporting it in the framework that we use, is lifestyle changes. So we look at, I don't believe in doing anything that's going to stress out your body. I don't believe in these extreme diets where we cut out certain huge macros. I think that puts a lot of stress on your body. If you're healthy and you want to give that a try, then I'm all for that. But until we get to a place of being in an equilibrium, a balanced state with our body, then we really need to go gently and slowly. So we're looking at, whole foods, non-processed foods. We're looking at easy swaps where you can take this out and put this in. Right. And so we're looking at things that we can incorporate in our life that's not going to add a whole lot of extra work, but that is going to add a whole lot of benefit. So once we can start, pulling out the processed sugar and putting in maybe some natural sugar, some honey and some maple syrup, that can make a really big difference. And I go with a 90% rule on that. I think what you do 90% is much more important than what we do the 10% because we need to be able to go out for supper sometimes and treat ourselves. We need to, it's summertime, so everybody wants to have like an ice cream or something like that. And I think that given a healthy body, we can fit all of that in. Yes. And so in addition to that, for a healthy lifestyle, I focus on movement that is gentle. So if you love doing yoga, do yoga. If you love doing dance, do dance. If you love walking through the woods, do that. Gentle, non-stressful. A lot of the times what we see with women, especially who have ADHD, we like these powerlifting and we like the intense cardio because we like that dopamine hit. When we're healing, it's very important to kind of pull back on that a little bit because we want to reduce the stress that we have on our body. And that my program is all about reducing stress.
Yes.
So there's that. That's the fourth step is lifestyle shifts. And then the fifth step is is bringing in your spiritual practices. So, whether it's religion or spirituality or, just a belief in yourself as having a higher self that you can tune into, one of the important things is recognizing that, we are here on kind of a soul level. Right, we're doing these things and we're having these thoughts, but there's a spirit level of ourself that's rising above that. So whether that's God or whether that's universe or again higher self, we can look to this other higher power in some way, whatever that means to you, and we can say, okay, that is without fear, right?
Mm-hmm.
And eliminating fear is eliminating stress. And so if we can look to something else that has no fear and get guidance from that thing that is not operating from a place of fear, then it's much easier for us to sort of reset our compass. A lot of people a lot of Christians will say, what would Jesus do? It's one of the ways that we can sort of use that as a touchstone to say, okay, if I had no fear in this moment, what choice would I make?
Mm-hmm.
And so that is when I talk about spirituality, that's what I mean is reducing fear and going more towards self-love. And so those are the 5 steps that I like to to put into practice for all of my clients.
Yeah. And most people that are listening to my podcast are like, wow, it's a lot. Sounds just like what my beliefs are, which they're all spot on, because again, you have to bring yourself to a space of calm, because when your body is calm, there's steps to get there. But when your body is calm, you're just in a totally different mind frame or frame of mind, so that you can make different choices, so that you can see things from a clearer lens, and then you're showing up differently. And I think that all reverts back to the radical self-love. When we're able to be in a calm state, when we're able to really come from a place of radical self-love, we are making different choices than we would have when we don't have those things balanced out and where they should be. So, and not should, but where you will feel your best. And again, one of the things, midlife, we're going through all these changes. And so adding that adds stress in itself, like the shifting of hormones and all of those things. That is a natural shift in, the stress that we feel in our body, because our body's trying to recalibrate. So it needs even that much more support during this time. And I am about movement, but I'm also about, like Michelle said, finding movement that works for you and that is not going to spike your cortisol, because again, exercise movement can put stress on your body. It does. It's not a bad stress, but in this particular phase of life, we need to be reeling it back a tiny bit to approach it differently. HIIT workouts, things like that might not be the best choice for you at this moment.
Right.
Not to say that's for everybody, but it's just, if you're not feeling your best, it just might be something to sort of reframe and try and dabble in, and see, by trying different things, do you feel different? If you're somebody who runs 5 days a week, maybe run 2 and do something a little bit more calming for 3, and do it for a couple of weeks and just get curious. How do you feel? And, when we're talking about detoxing and we're talking about, really feeding our bodies well, whole foods, have very good benefits to them. And cilantro is one that I've been talking about this week. It's a natural food that helps gently detoxify, right? It's not something that's going to go in and give you this giant hit. So while you're transitioning and maybe you're going on different protocols to really get yourself detoxed, start shifting the lifestyle choices for whole foods while you're going through that, so that when you start to, come out of a detox program, if that's what you choose to do, you're already supporting yourself through whole foods. And when Michelle was saying, ditching certain things, we're always talking about swaps in my group and with my clients and things, because when people say, I could never give up, I love that. When people are like, well, I could never give up that. And I'm like, okay, well, what is it that you can't give up? Let's see what we can swap, because no, we don't want you to feel deprived. This isn't about, and that's what our culture has run on for so long, is let's take this all out. And then you're just feeling like you're deprived of everything. So then that doesn't feel good. And that's not going to work. It's not going to create the lifestyle. So It sounds like your program is a very comprehensive lifestyle overhaul, and I love that. And I think if you're somebody in this mid-age range and you're looking for something, we're going to drop all of Michelle's information in the notes. You guys can check her out on her social media handles. She now has a YouTube channel. I will make sure that gets on there too, so you can see who she is and how she teaches and functions and all the things, because I think that's also important about connection. So before we end, just really quick, I like to ask all the people that come on to my podcast, all the guests, for a non-negotiable. What is something that you do every day that is non-negotiable for you that sets you up to have, a healthy day, feeling your best and your most vibrant self?
Oh, my non-negotiable. I think I've probably already touched on that. My non-negotiable is recognizing when I am living somebody else's life. So if I am living somebody else's belief, then my non-negotiable is to switch that to my own belief. And I've done this work for decades, and I still find sometimes that I am looking at things through somebody else's lens. And I am approaching it through beliefs that were never my own, just that were handed down to me. And so every day, in every choice that I make, that makes me feel that I feel a sense of dis-ease from. If I'm feeling not at peace, then I sit with that and I think about, how could I change this? How could I change how I feel about that thing, so that it aligns more with myself, and so that it aligns more with my ability to love myself with the way that I feel about that.
Oh my
And
gosh, so
so,
good.
yeah, I have to, it's a practice. It's a practice that we do every single day as soon as we open our eyes. And eventually it's not laborious. It just kind of becomes second nature. I don't really have to think about it very much anymore. But yeah, that's how I live, and I couldn't do without that.
And that's a really wonderful non-negotiable that everybody can try on this week and start to kind of become aware when things are popping up, asking yourself that question, is this my belief? Is this somebody else's belief? Am I actually doing something through the lens of somebody else rather than myself? And when you can start to do that, the shift, the mind-blowing experiences of taking back empowerment for yourself, I have seen personally for myself, is just amazing. So
Yeah.
I'm really glad you brought that up as your non-negotiable, because I think it's, again, something really overlooked as being something that leads to a healthy lifestyle. So I appreciate you sharing that. For everybody else listening, thank you so much for tuning in. And Michelle, again, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your wisdom. And until next time, I hope you all have a great week, and we will talk to you soon.
Thanks so much, Robin.
I hope that you guys really loved that episode. I absolutely loved getting to know Michelle and hearing about not only her story about her journey through having ADHD, but also all the things that she's learned, along this journey that she's been taking. And radical self-love and personal accountabilities really stood out to me. Her 5 steps, getting regulated through your neurotransmitters, your vagus nerve, which she has that safe and sound protocol that she uses, helping us to create a better belief system for ourselves. Obviously, lifestyle changes through nutrition and movement, and really getting in touch with our spirituality. And I think that this program she teaches is really all encompassing of whole health. So if it's something that you're interested in, obviously in the show notes, I'm going to drop all of the information. If you're wanting to do a continued dive into nervous system regulation, make sure that you go back to season 4, episode 3, where we talk with Deborah also about nervous system regulation. And I'm going to continue to point out different episodes on the same topics, because everybody resonates with different people. And, nervous system regulation is something that's so underutilized and overlooked. And I want to make sure that you guys are building an understanding of how important that is to create safe space for healing and to create the best wellness for yourself. If you guys have any questions, please let us know. If you love this episode, I would absolutely appreciate it if you would review it on Apple Podcast, share it with a friend who might, need something of this nature to listen to. And as always, thank you for showing up every week for yourself and, creating the best wellness for you by, number one, being in community, educating yourself, and taking those 1% shifts every week. I hope that you'll have a great week, and I will talk to you soon. Thank you for tuning in to another episode on healthy lifestyle habits for midlife mamas. I hope you found a 1% shift this week to move you forward on your wellness journey. Remember, small changes add up to big transformations. I want to hear what resonated with you. If you enjoyed the episode, please leave a review and rate the show. Your feedback is truly the only way that I know that you're taking away 1% shifts, adding value to your journey. It is also a way for others to find the podcast. My dream is to empower others to create health and healing. And so I would love for this show to spread wide and far. To stay connected, please check out my Instagram and Facebook pages at Live Life Balanced with Robin. Join my newsletter and grab some freebies at livelifebalancedwithrobin.com. And if you're looking to work one-on-one with a health coach, feel free to book a discovery call on my website as well. Thank you for allowing me to be part of your day. It truly means a lot that you are allowing me on your wellness journey with you. Until next time, find peace, love, and light by breathing, being present, and allowing for all possibilities to happen. Have a great day.